The polished crowd at the rooftop bar burst into quiet, cutting laughter the moment the worn-out single father fumbled with his jacket zipper and nearly knocked over a decorative vase. To them, he was just another lost soul who had wandered into the wrong part of the city. They had no idea they were laughing at a phantom, a man who had spent 12 years as one of the most lethal weapons the government had ever created, now trying to live as nothing more than a tired dad. But when a team of armed professionals came through the emergency stairwell doors with weapons raised, targeting the tech billionaire seated at the bar, the laughter died completely. It took less than 3 seconds for everything to change. Chicago's Lakeshore Drive was alive with the distant sound of traffic that Wednesday evening, the kind of restless city energy that never fully quieted, no matter the hour. 40 floors above the street, the Pinnacle Rooftop Lounge sat perched atop the Meridian Tower like a glass crown, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of Lake Michigan shimmering silver in the dusk. This wasn't the kind of place where you dropped in for a beer after a long shift. The cocktail menu started at $30. The clientele were the people who shaped Chicago from behind closed doors. Real estate developers with portfolios worth 9 figures, hedge fund managers who bought and sold entire industries before noon, and the kind of old-money socialites who wore their boredom like a tailored accessory. Victoria Harlow occupied a corner booth with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room without needing to announce it. At 34, she was the founder and CEO of Nexus Dynamics, a technology and defense infrastructure company that had quietly become one of the most powerful private firms in the country. She wore a fitted midnight blue blazer, her dark eyes scanning a contract brief on her phone, while a glass of still water sat untouched beside her. Her head of security, a compact and watchful man named Garrett, sat 2 tables away pretending to review his own phone while cataloging every face in the room. Victoria preferred places like Pinnacle for client meetings precisely because the ambient noise of quiet money created a kind of natural privacy. The unspoken code of the wealthy held here. Nobody eavesdropped, nobody made a scene, and nobody paid attention to anyone else's business. That code held firm until the elevator doors slid open and a man named Marcus Webb stepped out, immediately and completely out of place. Marcus was 38 years old, but the years had layered themselves onto him the way hard weather shapes stone. He was broad through the shoulders and moved with a certain deliberate economy, the kind of physical self-awareness that comes not from vanity, but from long practice. He wore a dark canvas jacket that had been washed too many times, a plain charcoal Henley, and jeans that were clean but clearly not designed for a room like this one. His jaw carried the uneven shadow of a man who shaved when he remembered to, and his eyes, dark and deeply set, did a quiet, rapid survey of the room the instant he stepped off the elevator. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man who was constantly doing math in his head. Holding his right hand was his daughter, Zoe, who had recently turned 6 and was currently wearing a bright red rain jacket that was slightly too big for her, a pair of blue light-up sneakers, and an expression of profound wonder at the height of everything. She was clutching a well-worn stuffed elephant she called Captain and was enthusiastically pointing out every detail of the room with the enthusiasm of someone who had never encountered anything so impractical or beautiful in her short life. "Daddy, the chairs are made of fluff," Zoe whispered loudly, reaching out to touch the velvet back of a bar stool. "Real fluff." "Don't touch, Bug," Marcus said softly, steering her gently toward the host stand. He had promised her something special after her Thursday school recital and had meant to take her to a well-reviewed dessert cafe 3 blocks south. He had written down the wrong address. They were 40 floors in the wrong direction. At the long, curved bar, a group of 4 sat positioned like a nature documentary about apex financial predators. Leading the pack was Derek Sloan, 31 years old, the son of a very wealthy and very connected Chicago family. Currently employed at his father's private equity firm in a role whose description was deliberately vague. Derek wore a watch that cost more than a modest car, spoke with the serene confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, and held his whiskey glass with the easy authority of a man accustomed to holding rooms. He noticed Marcus and Zoe the moment they stepped off the elevator. He said nothing for a moment, just let his gaze linger with a small, private smile forming at the corner of his mouth, the particular expression of a man about to enjoy himself at someone else's expense. "I didn't know they were doing Bring Your Rescue Project to Work night," Derek murmured, angling toward the colleague on his left. The group around him offered the expected chuckles, low enough to be deniable and loud enough to carry. Victoria, across the room, looked up from her phone. She clocked Derek's posture, tracked the direction of his amusement, found Marcus and Zoe at the host stand, and felt a quiet, familiar irritation settle in her chest. She had grown up around men like Derek Sloan. She knew the particular cruelty of people who had never been uncomfortable a day in their life. She watched Marcus. She expected the slight tension in the shoulders, the downward shift of the eyes, the body language of a person absorbing the ambient hostility of a space that didn't want them. Marcus didn't offer any of that. He simply stood at the host stand with his daughter's hand in his posture neither aggressive nor diminished, his eyes already having completed their second quiet pass around the room. Emergency exits on the east and west stairwells, one service corridor behind the bar, support pillars at regular intervals, the security guard near the elevator who was more decorative than functional, and Garrett, 2 tables from the corner, whose stillness was just slightly too professional for a man on a casual night out. Marcus noted him, filed him. At the dessert station near the center of the lounge, the evening's moment arrived. Marcus had settled Zoe onto a bar stool at the dessert counter and ordered her a hot cocoa with the kind of whipped cream architecture that was essentially a structural engineering achievement. Zoe, vibrating with excitement, reached forward to examine a small decorative jar of cocoa powder sitting near the display. Her elbow caught the edge of her mug. The mug tipped. Dark, sweet cocoa arced across the polished bar surface and cascaded directly off the edge onto the Italian leather shoes of Derek Sloan, who had materialized at the counter behind them. Derek made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a snarl, leaping backward. He stared at his shoes with the expression of a man witnessing a natural disaster. "You have got to be kidding me." He turned the full weight of his contempt down toward Zoe, who had gone very still, her lower lip already trembling. "That is completely unacceptable. Those are Berluti. Do you have any idea what those cost? Does your father?" Zoe looked like she was about to cry. Her small hand tightened around Captain the Elephant. Marcus was already moving. He didn't look at Derek. He crouched down to Zoe's level, producing a folded napkin from his jacket pocket, with the practiced reflex of a man who had spent 6 years being always 2 steps ahead of a small child's entropy. He began dabbing at the front of her sleeve, where a small splash had landed. "It's all right, Z. Total accident. Nothing to cry about." He kept his voice calm and easy, the way you speak to a startled animal. He kissed the top of her head. "I'm not even a little bit upset with you." Derek's jaw tightened. The lack of reaction from Marcus seemed to aggravate him considerably more than any argument would have. "Hey, I'm talking to you. I want to know how you plan on handling this because those shoes—" Marcus stood up slowly. He was not a short man. He looked at Derek with an expression that could only be described as the specific patience of someone who has witnessed genuine catastrophe and has consequently lost the ability to find this particular situation very interesting. "Give me your information," Marcus said quietly. "I'll cover the cleaning. Or replacement, if it comes to that." "You'll cover replacement?" Derek's voice had a bright, performative edge to it now, playing to the nearby tables that had gone subtly quiet. "On what? A city worker's salary? Be serious." "On the salary of someone who is asking you politely once, not to speak to his daughter the way you just did," Marcus said. His voice had not changed in volume or temperature, but something in it had shifted. Something that made the bartender who was reaching for a bottle 2 feet away very quietly stop reaching. Derek laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had never once lost a social confrontation. "You wandered into the wrong building, friend. And you probably wandered into the wrong city. Maybe take the kid back somewhere with a kid's menu and let the adults, He didn't finish the sentence. Not because Marcus stopped him. Because the east stairwell door opened with a crash that had nothing to do with normal use, and 4 men in dark tactical clothing moved into the rooftop lounge with the coordinated geometry of people who had done this before. They were not robbers. Their movement made that immediately clear. Robbers swept a room. These men had a single directional focus. The lead operative had already identified Victoria Harlow's corner booth before the door had finished swinging. His 2 colleagues moved to cover the room while the 4th took up position at the elevator. "Down. Everyone down. Nobody moves and nobody makes a call." The voice was flat and professional, not theatrical, which paradoxically made it far more frightening than any amount of shouting would have been. The rooftop lounge responded with the particular chaos of people who had never before been afraid in a building this expensive. Derek Sloan dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered. He was on the floor 4 seconds later, wedged behind the dessert counter with both hands over his head, the Berluti shoes forgotten entirely. Victoria Harlow did not scream. She recognized the operational signature of this immediately and viscerally, the way you recognize a disease that has already been in your home. She had been fighting a hostile takeover bid for 18 months from a rival infrastructure firm called Vanguard Consolidated, run by a man named Roland Voss, who had proven himself willing to operate outside every legal and ethical boundary that existed. She had cost him 2 government contracts worth a combined $8 billion in the last year. She had received 3 separate threat communications through intermediaries, each one deniable, each one clearly real. She had not expected them to move this quickly or this directly. Garrett reached inside his jacket. The nearest operative spotted the motion before the motion was complete. A sharp command, and Garrett found himself redirected behind a pillar by 2 controlled bursts that chewed into the concrete 3 inches from his head. He went down into cover, his weapon drawn, but his angle blocked. The operatives had planned this room. They had done their reconnaissance. The lead man had covered the distance to Victoria's booth in the time all of this had taken. He was large, professional, and entirely without hesitation. His purpose was acquisition. 2 of his colleagues would handle the room. The 4th held the exit. This was a clean extraction. His path from the stairwell door to Victoria's booth ran him directly past the dessert counter, directly past Marcus Webb and his 6-year-old daughter. Marcus did not freeze. He had not frozen in any crisis in the 12 years before he became a father, and fatherhood had not changed the hardware, only the software that ran on top of it. In the operational part of his mind, the part that had been assembled and refined over more than a decade with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, the part that never fully went offline, the room was already mapped. He moved. In one continuous motion, he put Zoe flat against the back of the dessert counter, below the line of sight, tucking her beneath the reinforced steel shelf with her back to the wall, pressing Captain the Elephant into her arms. Stay here. Eyes closed. I will come back in exactly 1 minute. He said it the way you tell a child the sky is blue. Absolute. Factual. He came up from behind the counter as the lead operative passed. He did not announce himself. He did not adopt a combat stance. He used the heavy marble dessert board from the counter surface, 18 inches of solid stone, bringing it around in a controlled arc that connected with the back of the operative's skull at precisely the angle calculated to produce maximum neurological disruption without killing him. The man's legs buckled. The weapon dropped. Marcus caught both the man and the weapon simultaneously, redirecting the body behind the counter and coming up with the sidearm in a two-handed grip before the operative's knees had fully contacted the floor. 1 second. The second operative, covering the east side of the room, caught the motion in his peripheral vision and spun. He was fast. He was not fast enough. Marcus had already moved laterally, putting the granite pillar between himself and the operative's angle, and fired twice. Body armor absorbed both rounds. The operative went backward off his feet from the impact transfer alone, striking the bar with his spine and sliding down it with his lungs, completely emptied. Conscious, but non-functional. 2 seconds. The third operative, who had been covering the west side, leveled his weapon. Marcus was already moving again, not retreating, moving forward and to the side, creating a tracking problem, firing once in a precision shot that connected with the unprotected joint at the operative's shoulder, the gap between the plate and the sleeve. The weapon dropped. The man dropped with it, clutching his arm. The fourth operative, posted at the elevator, had his weapon up. He had training. He also had, standing 10 feet in front of him, a man who had spent 12 years refining the specific skill set of ending armed confrontations before they fully began. Marcus sighted. The operative made the professional's mistake of hesitating half a second too long in the face of something his training hadn't prepared him for. Marcus fired. The round took the operative in the thigh outside the armor, dropping him sideways against the elevator doors. 3 seconds. The rooftop fell into a stunned, ringing silence, broken only by the faint ambient sound of the city 40 floors below and the sound of Derek Sloan quietly hyperventilating behind the dessert counter. Garrett came out from behind the pillar with his weapon up, scanning the room. He was former Army Ranger. He knew immediately, with the same bone-level certainty that any trained operator would have in the presence of another, that what had just happened was not civilian improvisation. He had seen soldiers move under fire. This was something above that. Marcus had already set the captured weapon on the bar surface, safety engaged. He had turned away from the 4 downed operatives. He was already on one knee at the dessert counter. "Okay, Z, minute's up. You can open your eyes." Zoe opened her eyes. She was clutching Captain with both arms, and her chin was doing something very unsteady. "It was really loud, Daddy." "I know. All done now." He picked her up and held her against his shoulder, turning her face away from the room. "Let's find our coats." Garrett stepped forward, weapon still raised toward the exits, though his eyes were fixed on Marcus. "Hey, stop! Who are you? I need you to stay. Police are being called right now." Marcus paused near the emergency stairwell door without turning. I got turned around looking for a dessert place on Michigan Avenue. I apologize for the cocoa situation. He pushed through the door and was gone. The police response to the Pinnacle incident was swift and, for Victoria Harlow, easily managed. She had a crisis communications team that had handled worse. Within an hour, the 4 operatives were in custody, and the rooftop had been cleared. Victoria sat in the back of her armored car on Lower Wacker Drive with a thermal blanket around her shoulders that she didn't need, watching the city move past the tinted windows with the particular stillness of a person who has just finished calculating something. She thought about what she had watched happen in that room. She had been surrounded by powerful men her entire professional life. She had negotiated with generals and senators and people who ran countries from behind other people's titles. She understood the difference between the performance of power and its actual substance. The way a trained eye can tell the difference between a reproduction and an original painting. Derek Sloan was a reproduction. Whatever the man in the canvas jacket had just done, in that rooftop lounge was so far beyond reproduction that the comparison was almost embarrassing. What struck her most was not the precision or the speed, though both had been extraordinary. It was the sequence. He had put his daughter down first, then the marble board, then the weapon, then Garrett's situation, then the elevator operative. In under 4 seconds, he had hierarchically processed a 4-person armed tactical team in order of threat priority and resolved each element with the minimum necessary force. Then, he had turned immediately, without ceremony, and gone back to his 6-year-old. Garrett climbed into the front of the car, running a hand over his face. "The 4 operatives are confirmed Vanguard Consolidated contractors," he said. "Ex-military, organized, targeted. This was a Roland Voss operation." Victoria nodded once. She had known this before the first door opened. "And the man with the little girl?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, I've been in this business for 16 years, 12 of those in uniform. What that man did in that room, the movement pattern, the threat sequencing, the shot placement, that is not law enforcement. That is not standard military. That is someone who spent a very long time doing very specific things in places where mistakes were not survivable." "Find him," Victoria said. "With respect, people who disappear through stairwell doors after something like that are usually trying very hard not to be found." "He saved my life," Victoria said, "and he was told by some useless man in expensive shoes that he didn't belong in the room." She looked out the window. "Find him." It took Garrett and a small team of Nexus Dynamics intelligence analysts 4 days. They worked backward from the Pinnacle security footage, through city traffic cameras, transit records, and a facial recognition cross-reference with public databases. When they finally landed a confirmed match, the results were a wall of classified redactions that told a very specific kind of story. The name attached to the face was Marcus Webb. He was 38 years old, originally from rural West Virginia, enlisted at 17, qualified for Ranger selection within 2 years, tapped for Delta assessment 3 years after that, spent 11 years in the unit, doing things that existed only in classified annexes and the memories of the men who had been present. 3 Distinguished Service Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, a Purple Heart, a file that was approximately 40% text and 60% black ink. He had separated from service 4 years ago. The reason was in a single paragraph that had not been redacted, perhaps because whoever had processed his discharge thought that particular detail was not operationally sensitive. His wife, Diana Webb, had died 22 months into his last deployment. pancreatic cancer, diagnosed and terminal within 4 months of each other. She had refused to call him home until she had no more time left, and he had arrived 48 hours before she died. He had held her hand and then come back to a small apartment in Pilsen with a 4-year-old daughter who was still asking when Mommy was coming back. He had not re-upped. He had taken sole custody of Zoe and had spent the subsequent 4 years working as a licensed electrician, taking contracts for commercial renovation and residential upgrades, living quietly in a 2-flat in Pilsen 2 blocks from the elementary school where Zoe was, by all accounts, doing extremely well in the 1st grade. Garrett delivered this file to Victoria on a Sunday evening in her home office overlooking the Chicago River. She read it twice without speaking. "Derek Sloan," she said, after a long silence. "He manages the venture capital allocation for our employee investment pool, doesn't he? Through his family's firm." Garrett nodded carefully. "About $280 million in exposure." "Terminate the relationship," Victoria said. "Tomorrow morning, 1st hour. Call his senior partners personally. Tell them the termination is complete, and the reason for it is a matter of documented record involving the professional conduct of their employee. Make sure that record is shared with the relevant industry oversight bodies." "And if they push back?" "They won't," Victoria said. She turned a page. "And what do we do about Marcus Webb?" Garrett met her eyes in the reflection of the darkened window. "That's above my pay grade, Ms. Harlow." Victoria closed the folder. She stood and crossed to the window, looking down at the river lights, doubling on the water below. She had built Nexus Dynamics from a 1-room office and a borrowed server rack. She had survived a hostile acquisition attempt, 2 regulatory investigations, and 3 years of Roland Voss doing everything short of what he had apparently decided to do Wednesday evening. She knew exactly how to evaluate an asset and understand its actual value versus its perceived value. Marcus Webb was not an asset. He was a man who had covered a 6-year-old girl with his own body while 4 armed professionals tried to take the room. He had done it without being asked, without hesitation, and without staying for acknowledgement. She thought about that for a long time. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon," she finally said. "I need to speak with an electrician." By 9 the following morning, Derek Sloan's access to the Meridian Tower office he used for his family firm's Chicago operations had been deactivated. The termination of Nexus Dynamics' $280 million investment relationship hit his firm like a structural beam coming down. When his senior partners demanded an explanation, Victoria's office sent them the Pinnacle security footage with a single line of accompanying text, noting that the incident had raised concerns about the professional judgment of their personnel. By noon, 3 other institutional clients had followed Nexus's lead with their own quiet divestments. By 3 o'clock, Derek's keycard had been collected by building security, and he had been escorted in front of the full-floor staff to the elevator. Victoria did not enjoy this. She found it merely necessary. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a discreet black company car parked 2 streets away from a 2-flat on a quiet Pilsen block. Victoria stepped out alone. She was dressed in dark trousers, a simple navy coat, and flat-soled boots. She was carrying a paper shopping bag from a children's bookstore on Division Street. From inside the building came the deliberate, rhythmic sound of work, the measured whine of a drill, the clean sound of a wire being fed through a conduit. She followed the sound to the side entrance of the building, where a steel access panel had been removed from the wall and a series of circuit boards were neatly laid out on a drop cloth. Marcus Webb was crouching over the panel with a voltage meter in one hand and a small flashlight in his teeth, wearing a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. Without his jacket, a long scar was visible along his left forearm, pale and healed, curving from elbow toward wrist in a way that had not happened accidentally. He looked entirely focused on the junction box in front of him. He did not look up. "You move quietly for someone who doesn't do this professionally," he said, the flashlight still in his teeth. He removed it and set down the voltage meter. "Though the car parked on Carpenter 2 blocks back gave you about 40 seconds of warning, so I had time to think about whether to keep pretending I hadn't noticed." Victoria stopped walking. "How did you know it was me?" Marcus stood. He picked up a rag and began cleaning his hands with the particular unhurried focus of a man who had long since stopped performing things for an audience. "Your company car isn't subtle, and I spent Wednesday night researching who Roland Voss actually wanted removed from the board, which is how I confirmed your name before morning." He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dark and entirely direct. "I figured one of two things would happen. Either Voss sends another team, which I have been thinking about operationally, or the person whose life I apparently disrupted Wednesday night comes to find me personally." "I came to thank you," Victoria said, "and to apologize for the fact that a man like Derek Sloan had the audacity to speak to you and your daughter the way he did." "You're not responsible for Derek Sloan," Marcus said. "No," Victoria agreed. "But I want you to know that situation has been addressed." She set the shopping bag on the top step between them. "The bag is for Zoe, some books, and a new set of light-up sneakers because I noticed the ones she was wearing were getting close to the end of their useful life. And for you," she said, "I have a proposal." Marcus looked at the bag and then at her. His expression did not change. "You pulled whatever wasn't redacted from my file. Now you want to put me on payroll." "I want to hire you to dismantle Voss's operation," Victoria said, "not as personal security, as an intelligence and operational consultant to help me take apart the network he's built to operate outside the law. He has deep connections with people in 3 federal agencies. He has a paramilitary contracting arm that doesn't appear on any of his public corporate filings. What happened Wednesday will happen again unless the root cause is removed." Marcus had crossed his arms. His jaw had the quality of something that had been cast in place. "I know how this conversation goes," he said. "You tell me what I already know, which is that Voss has the reach and the resources to try again, and that Zoe isn't safe while he has a reason to come at you. And then you tell me what you'll pay, because you've decided that my daughter's future is the lever." Victoria said nothing. "I'll save you the negotiation," Marcus said. His voice had dropped in register without changing in volume, the way a room gets colder without anyone having touched a window. "I spent 11 years in places you've read about in briefings. I missed Zoe's first day of school, and her second Christmas, and her mother's last 6 weeks of life because I was in a hole somewhere doing things that don't appear in any document that will ever be declassified. I came home, and I made a choice. That choice was her, not a role, not a salary, not a contract, her." There was nothing adversarial in his voice, just the absolute, stripped-down factuality of a man who had arrived at his position through loss so total that the only clarity left was love. Victoria had negotiated contracts with defense ministers and intelligence directors. She had never felt this particular kind of stillness in a conversation before. "I understand," she said, and she meant it, without qualification. "I'm sorry for coming here. I'm sorry for the situation my presence on Wednesday brought to your neighborhood." She picked up the shopping bag from the step and held it toward him. "The books and shoes are for Zoe regardless of your answer. They're not a payment." She turned to go. "Ms. Harlow—" She stopped. His voice had changed. She turned back. Marcus was not looking at her. He was looking at the street. His posture had undergone a shift so subtle that anyone without specific training would have missed it. But she caught it. The deliberate stillness, the fixed point of attention at something well past her left shoulder. The silver sedan that turned onto the block 30 seconds ago is the same one that's been circling this neighborhood for the past 20 minutes, Marcus said, not moving his gaze. It stopped for 14 seconds at the north end of the block, which is longer than a person looking for parking would stop without either pulling in or moving on. Victoria felt the cold move through her before the understanding fully arrived. "Garrett is 2 blocks away," she started. "Get inside," Marcus said. The warmth was gone from his voice as completely as if it had never been there. It was not a request. "Call him now. Tell him to approach from the east on foot and do not use the car. If they've been watching, they know your vehicle." Victoria was already moving. She went through the side entrance, Marcus close behind her, the door closing quietly. He hit the interior lights and they stood in the half-dark of the building's first-floor hallway, while Victoria's fingers moved over her phone. "He's coming," she said, her voice steady by training. "Good." Marcus had moved to the window at the end of the hall, standing to one side of the frame, where he could see the street without being visible from it. He had picked something up as he moved through the space. Something from the drop cloth on the floor. It was a long-handled pipe wrench, and he was holding it the way a person holds a thing they know how to use. Outside, the silver sedan had not moved. 2 occupants visible in the front, Marcus said, with the clinical detachment of someone reading a weather report. The rear windows are tinted, but the vehicle is riding low on the right side. Weight distribution suggests a 3rd person in the back right seat, which means they either have equipment or a 3rd operative trying to stay out of the sight line of passing pedestrians. "Roland Voss," Victoria said. Not a question. "He doesn't stop," Marcus said. "That's the thing about men like him. The Operation Wednesday was expensive and it failed publicly. That kind of failure with that kind of resource commitment doesn't produce retreat. It produces escalation." A silence fell between them. From somewhere upstairs in the building, a child's television program was playing, a brief note of the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. "The contractor I was replacing the panel for is going to be home in an hour," Marcus said. "Zoe is at school until 3:15. He was still watching the sedan. "When this is finished, I'm going to need to pick her up." "When this is finished," Victoria said carefully, "whatever you need." The sedan's door opened. One man stepped out, moving toward the building's main entrance with the specific casual, not casual walk of a professional trying to look like a delivery person. Marcus was gone from the window before Victoria registered him moving. What followed in the next 90 seconds was not something Victoria was positioned to observe clearly. She heard very little, which told her a great deal. When it was done, Marcus came back through the side entrance with a slight mark on his jaw that had not been there before, and the calm expression of someone who had just resolved a mild logistical inconvenience. He set the pipe wrench back on the drop cloth. "2 of them," he said. "The 3rd stayed in the car. He's going to have a difficult time starting the engine now." He paused. "Garrett is going to find 2 men sitting very unhappily on the front steps in about 4 minutes. I'd suggest having him collect them before a neighbor calls it in." Victoria stared at him. "You should know," Marcus said, picking up his voltage meter from the drop cloth and returning to the circuit panel as though resuming a task he had merely set aside, "that this won't stop with these 3. Voss has the structure and the money to keep sending people indefinitely. What you're dealing with is not a security problem, it's an organizational problem. You need to dismantle the mechanism, not keep deflecting its outputs." Victoria watched him reconnect a ground wire with the same precise attention he had given to the street 3 minutes before. "I thought you were done fighting other people's wars," she said. "I was," Marcus said, "until someone brought the war to the block where my daughter goes to school." He tightened a terminal connection. "So the offer still stands on your end?" "The offer stands." "Then we do this my way," Marcus said. "No corporate structure around me, no official role, no paper trail. I pick the team if I need one, and I pick when and how. You provide the intelligence access and the legal infrastructure to hand what we find to the right people at the right time. Voss goes to prison. Not a grave. I'm not interested in graves." "Agreed," Victoria said, "on every point. And Zoe stays completely outside this. I will, personally, ensure that." Marcus looked at her for a long moment with those dark, entirely direct eyes. Then he turned back to the panel. "I need 2 days to review the structural layout of Voss's operation," he said. "I'll also need everything Nexus has on his offshore contracting structure and any names you have on the federal officials he's been paying. Can your team have that ready by Thursday morning?" "It will be ready Wednesday night." "Then I'll be in touch." He fitted a wire into its terminal. "The shopping bag is on the step. Don't forget it." What happened over the following 3 weeks did not appear in any newspaper, because Victoria Harlow ensured that it wouldn't until it needed to. Marcus worked with the specific, unhurried efficiency of a man who had learned long ago that urgency was the enemy of precision. He did not storm Roland Voss's office tower. He did not conduct any action that could not be documented and handed to a federal prosecutor with a clean chain of evidence. He found the people in Voss's network who were there because they were paid and not because they were committed, and he gave them better options. He found the digital architecture of Voss's illegal contracting structure, and he walked Victoria's analysts through it door by door until they had a complete map of every offshore account, every shell corporation, every contract that should not have existed. He identified the 3 federal officials on Voss's payroll by their operational signatures in the communications traffic, the particular texture of their decisions over the prior 2 years, and he gave that identification to Victoria with the documentation to support each one. He did all of this without being shot, which he considered important. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 23 days after the evening at Pinnacle, federal agents executed warrants at 4 locations simultaneously: Roland Voss's corporate offices in Chicago and Atlanta, a private facility in Virginia that did not appear on any of Voss Consolidated's public filings, and the home of a senior official in the Defense Procurement Division whose choices over the past 4 years had cost the public a sum that would have funded a small nation's infrastructure budget. Voss himself was taken into custody at his private aviation terminal in Schaumburg at 6:47 in the morning, still wearing the suit he had slept in, which was not the particular exit from power he had imagined for himself. The charges totaled 41 counts across 4 federal statutes. Marcus heard about the arrest on the radio while he was driving Zoe to school. "What's that?" Zoe asked, looking up from the small stuffed elephant in her lap. "Just news," Marcus said. He turned the radio off. "How's Captain this morning?" "He's good," Zoe said. "He's thinking about getting a new hat." "Reasonable," Marcus said. The morning sun came through the east windows of the Pilsen 2-flat and pooled on the kitchen floor in the particular golden way it did in October, and Marcus Webb was at the kitchen table assembling a replacement hinge mechanism for the cabinet door that had been bothering him since August. He had Zoe's school schedule on the refrigerator, a cup of coffee going cold to his left, and a podcast about woodworking playing at low volume from his phone. It was a Tuesday, which meant after school was the art club Zoe had joined, which ran until 4:30, which meant he had until 4:15 to finish the current renovation contract 2 streets over before picking her up. He heard the car pull up outside and recognized the sound of the engine from a block away. He took a sip of cold coffee. When the bell rang, he opened the door. Victoria Harlow was standing on his front steps in a dark green coat and jeans, no corporate armor in evidence, holding a bakery bag and looking like someone who had taken a morning off and was not entirely sure what people did during those. She looked, without the weight of a crisis around her, considerably more like a person. "Arthur, my driver, is around the corner," she said. He was very concerned about the parking situation on this block. "Tell him the spot in front of the blue door is fine on Tuesdays," Marcus said. He stepped back from the door. She came in. She set the bakery bag on the table next to the hinge mechanism and looked around the kitchen with the undisguised curiosity of someone filing information. "Voss was formally indicted this morning," she said. 41 counts. His legal team is already talking about cooperation agreements, which means the 3 federal contacts will likely be taken down by January. "Good," Marcus said. He sat back down at the table and picked up the hinge. "That's how it should go." Victoria sat down across from him. She put a paper cup of coffee in front of him. "I brought something for you." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a sealed envelope, which she set on the table between them. "Operational consulting fee. As discussed." Marcus looked at the envelope without touching it. "I know what we agreed." "I know you know," Victoria said, "and I know you'll argue about it. So I'll save us both the time. The fee goes into a custodial account in Zoe's name. It's already structured. You can use it for her education, for a house, for whatever she needs. The only administrative requirement is that you acknowledge receipt." A silence. "She asked about you," Marcus said finally, picking up the hinge again. "Last week. She wanted to know if the woman from the rooftop was the one who sent the books." Victoria felt something very quiet and very warm happen somewhere in the center of her chest. She had spent 15 years building Nexus dynamics from nothing into something that appeared on lists and in briefings and on the covers of quarterly publications. This kitchen, with its morning light and its bakery bag and the small refrigerator covered in first-grade artwork, felt more substantial than any of it. "What did you tell her?" Victoria asked. "I told her yes," Marcus said. He was fitting the hinge, testing the angle of it. "She wants to know if you like elephants. Captain is apparently considering expanding into a larger community." Victoria laughed. It was a genuine laugh, unscheduled, the kind that arrived without warning. "I am deeply in favor of elephants," she said. Marcus set down the hinge and looked at her. Not through her, not past her, not with the evaluating geometry of a man mapping a room, just at her, with the same directness he gave to everything. "She's at art club until 4:30, he said. "If you don't have anywhere to be, the coffee is still warm." Victoria Harlow, who had built an empire and survived a coordinated corporate assassination and testified before 2 Senate subcommittees and negotiated contracts in 4 languages, looked at the morning light on the kitchen floor of a 2-flat in Pilsen and made no move toward the door. "I don't have anywhere to be," she said. Marcus poured 2 mugs. "Then I suppose," he said, the corners of his mouth doing something that was not quite a smile but was close enough, "you should stay a while." And that is what real strength looks like. Not the volume of a man who buys expensive shoes and talks down to strangers, but the quietness of a man who already knows exactly what he's capable of and has chosen every single day to put his daughter first. 2 days later, at precisely 2 in the morning, a cold November rain was hammering the glass face of the Voss Consolidated Tower in the River North neighborhood of Chicago. The building was 42 stories of black steel and reflective glass, the kind of architecture that conveyed absolute confidence in its own permanence. Roland Voss had built it to be visible from every direction, a monument to the particular kind of power that announces itself without apology. In the narrow service alley behind the building's loading dock, a shadow separated itself from the deeper dark beneath the concrete overhang. Marcus Webb moved without sound across the wet asphalt. He was wearing a matte black plate carrier over a compression base layer, a compact suppressed sidearm on his right thigh, and a fixed blade knife on his left. He was carrying a small technical kit in a low-profile bag across one shoulder. On his head sat a pair of night vision monoculars, flipped up, not yet needed. He had spent 2 days mapping the building's operational patterns from the outside, learning the rhythm of its security rotations, the way you learn the rhythm of a sleeping person's breath. Voss ran a rotating team of 18 guards across 3 shifts, with heavier concentration on the executive floors and lighter coverage on the lower service levels. His external camera network had 2 blind spots, a 12-foot gap in coverage at the northwest service entrance, and a 3-second cycling lag in the northeast corner of the lobby feed every time the system performed its auto-refresh. Both had been documented by Marcus with the patience of someone who understood that the preparation was the operation. Victoria's voice came through the single earpiece he was wearing, clean and low. I have their internal security network mirrored on my system. The Northwest Door's access log shows a maintenance crew clocked out 40 minutes ago. The reader is still showing their credentials as active for another 20 minutes before the system purges. Understood, Marcus said. You have 11 guards on duty across the building right now, Victoria continued. 5 on floors 38 through 42, which is where Voss's private server infrastructure is located. 3 on the lobby and loading levels. 2 on the parking structure. 1 on the Security Operations Center on 12. The SOC is my first stop, Marcus said quietly. If I don't loop the cameras before I move above the 14th floor, the upstairs team will have a live feed of the stairwells. The SOC operator goes on break at 0212. He takes 18 minutes. There's a coffee machine in the break room on 11 that he uses every time without exception. It's the only one in the building that makes a particular brand he likes. A brief pause. I know this because I spent 6 hours reviewing his building access card history. Noted, Marcus said. I'm going in at 0215. He moved to the northwest service entrance, used the still-active maintenance credentials to pass the card reader, and was inside the building in 4 seconds. The service corridor was utilitarian and dimly lit, the infrastructure level of a building that spent its budget on the floors where clients came. He moved along the left wall, staying in the shadow margin, and took the service stairs to the 11th floor. The break room on 11 was empty. The Security Operations Center on 12 had, as Victoria had indicated, exactly 1 man at the console, and that man was currently 17 seconds into the walk to the elevator. Marcus waited in the stairwell until the elevator doors had closed, then covered the distance to the SOC in 8 seconds, sat down at the console, and began working. He had the camera loop installed in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It was not elegant work by the standards of Victoria's cyber analysts, but it did not need to be elegant. It needed to cover a 60-minute window, which it would. He was back in the stairwell before the security officer returned with his coffee. The climb to floor 38 was unremarkable. He took the stairs 1 level at a time, moving through each floor's landing in the 30-second window between the camera loops cycling, confirming no personnel in the stairwell before proceeding. By the time he reached 37, his left knee was reminding him that the cartilage there had been making complaints since a parachuting incident in 2016, that had not made any official report for reasons he had never been told to discuss. He pressed the pane into the same interior lockbox where he had been filing physical objections for 12 years, and kept climbing. The guard rotation on 38 ran 2 men on a 40-minute circuit. Marcus sat in the stairwell on 37 for 19 minutes, timing their pattern through the small window in the door until he had confirmed the interval and the walking speed and the 3 points in the circuit where each man's back was to the other. Then he moved. He did not knock either guard unconscious, though the option was available. He restrained both, efficiently and without injury, using industrial zip ties he had brought for this specific purpose, and secured them in the server room's secondary utility closet with enough space to sit comfortably and enough ventilation to breathe without concern. He was not at war with these men. They were employees doing a job. They would be found when the building security team realized their check-ins had lapsed, which would be approximately 40 minutes from now. The server room on 38 was the core of Voss Consolidated's operational archive. The offshore account ledgers, the black budget contracting files, the communications records with the federal officials on his payroll, the encrypted documentation of every operation run through the paramilitary contracting arm that did not appear on the company's public filings. Victoria's team had identified the specific server architecture months ago, but had lacked any legal mechanism to access it directly. What Marcus was doing tonight would not itself constitute legal evidence. What it would do was give Victoria's analysts the precise address of every piece of documentation they needed, so that when the federal warrants came, the investigators would know exactly where to look and would not have to spend 18 months digging through deliberate obfuscation. He inserted the extraction drive Victoria's team had prepared and began the copy process. "I'm in the archive," he said quietly. "Transfer running." "Copy," Victoria said. Her voice was entirely controlled. He had noticed in the past weeks that she maintained the same vocal quality in high-stress moments that she used in ordinary conversation. He recognized this as a skill rather than a natural trait, the kind of thing you cultivated through enough situations where panic was an unaffordable luxury. 42 minutes on the transfer, Marcus said, reading the progress bar. "How are we on the camera loop?" 51 minutes of coverage remaining. You have time." He stood near the server rack in the soft blue light of the indicator LEDs and let the machines do their work. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "The official in defense procurement, Hendricks." "Yes," Victoria said. "He approved 4 contracts over 3 years that went to Voss entities through shell structures. None of those projects were completed. Total value just under $2 billion. He was reciting this from memory, having read the documentation twice. He has a daughter at Northwestern. A brief silence on the line. "I know," Victoria said. "She doesn't know," Marcus said. It was not a question and not a judgment, just a fact being stated for the record. "No," Victoria said. "She doesn't. When this goes public, she will." He paused. "Make sure the prosecutors understand that she had no involvement. That should be on record before the indictments come down." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll make sure," Victoria said. "I'll make sure personally." The transfer ran. The building was quiet around him, in the way large buildings are quiet in the deep part of the night. A low mechanical hum underlying a silence so complete it had its own texture. Somewhere far below, the city continued its permanent conversation with itself, ambulances and late trains, and the wind off the lake that this time of year had a particular cutting quality that Marcus had grown to associate with Chicago, the way he associated other sensory details with other places he had spent concentrated time. He thought about Zoe asleep in the room with the blue curtains, Captain the elephant tucked against her ribs, her breathing the slow and steady measure of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of the night. He thought about what he was going to do if she grew up and asked him what he had been before he became her father. He had not decided yet what the honest answer was. He suspected it would be some version of, I was someone who knew how to do certain things, and I tried to do them in the service of something worth protecting, and then I found the one thing that was worth protecting more than anything else, and I came home. The transfer completed at 0341. Marcus removed the drive, secured the server room, and retraced his path to the service stairs. He was on the street and 2 blocks north by 0357, walking in the rain with his hood up and his hands in his pockets. One of approximately nobody out at this hour on a Wednesday night in November. Transfer confirmed intact, Victoria said in his ear. We have everything. Then we're done for tonight, Marcus said. Yes, she said. And then, a moment later, in a different register. Are you okay? He considered the question. His knee hurt. His shoulder had a familiar tightness from carrying the bag at the wrong angle. He was wet. He was also, on the whole, better than he had been at this time last week, and considerably better than he had been at this time 4 years ago. Sitting in a military family housing unit in Fort Bragg with a 4-year-old who didn't understand yet what the dress uniform in the closet meant. I'm fine, he said. Go to sleep, Victoria. A brief laugh. Clean and genuine. Good night, Marcus. He pulled his hood tighter against the rain and walked toward the Blue Line station, thinking about whether Zoe had mentioned anything about needing new colored pencils for art club, because he was fairly certain the orange and the yellow were both running low, and Tuesday was art club day, and he should probably stop at the supply store before 3:15. The city moved around him, indifferent and permanent. He was home by 4:30, and he was at the kitchen table with coffee and the hinge mechanism and a podcast about furniture restoration by 7, when Zoe came downstairs in her pajamas with Captain under one arm and stood in the kitchen doorway, squinting at the morning light. Daddy! Hey, Bug! Is today Tuesday? It is. She considered this with the gravity of someone reviewing a full schedule. Art club is today. I know. Can we have the good cereal? We can have the good cereal, Marcus said. He got up and got the cereal down from the cabinet, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do, ordinary and specific, and in its ordinariness, everything. In the weeks that followed, Chicago noticed things without quite being able to explain them. The word came down through the institutional networks, quietly and without announcement, that a particular investment firm had withdrawn its managing partner from client-facing activity pending an internal review, that a certain property development group had found its permit applications receiving an unusual degree of scrutiny, that 3 individuals in positions of federal oversight had each, within the same 10-day window, retained legal counsel and declined to comment on matters their offices had previously been happy to address with great confidence. None of these things appeared to be connected. To anyone watching closely, they had the quality of dominoes laid out by someone who had thought very carefully about the spacing before tipping the first one. Victoria received exactly 2 communications from Roland Voss's legal team in this period. The first was a strongly worded letter asserting that any implication of wrongdoing on the part of Voss Consolidated was defamatory and would be pursued to the fullest extent available under civil law. The second, delivered 3 weeks later, was substantially shorter and contained an offer of broad cooperation with any regulatory or law enforcement inquiry that Victoria's company might feel was warranted. She forwarded both to the federal prosecutors without comment. On a Saturday morning in late November, she drove herself to Pilsen for the first time, parking on the block where Marcus had told her the spot in front of the Blue Door was available on weekends. She was carrying a paper bag from the Polish bakery on Milwaukee Avenue, whose cardamom rolls she had been eating since graduate school, and she was wearing, for the first time in longer than she could precisely remember, no particular agenda. Zoe answered the door. She was wearing a shirt with a cartoon bear on it and had what appeared to be purple paint in her hair, and she looked at Victoria with the frank, evaluating stare of a 6-year-old, making up her mind. "Are you the elephant lady?" Zoe said. "I believe I am," Victoria said. Zoe considered this for a moment and then opened the door wider. "Captain wants to show you something," she said. "He found a hat. Come in." Victoria stepped inside. From the kitchen came the sound of coffee being poured and the particular comfortable silence of a Saturday morning in a house where nothing was required to be anything other than exactly what it was. The city moved outside the windows, gray and alive and full of itself. Inside it was warm,